Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Brad. What's the word tonight, man?
It's been a good day, man. I woke up, went to jiu-jitsu, and we drilled some guillotines. I don't know if you've ever had a guillotine placed around your neck. It's miserable. Drilling guillotines is hell, but it was awesome. Had an insanely crazy, wildly busy day at work, and then came home a little early and went to a temple open house. So for those of you guys who don't know, within the LDS Church, we have temples, and when a new one is built, there's an opportunity to just walk through it as an open house. We just did that for one locally that's opening up by us with my family. It was awesome. It really got me right spiritually and mentally, and here I am. How are you, man?
Yeah. That's cool, man. So does that mean you're changing, excuse my ignorance, like congregations or
Not
churches
entirely.
or whatever?
So within the LDS faith, there are just congregations. They're actually based geographically. So you don't really pick your congregation. You just go to they call them wards, the ward where you're assigned geographically. However, there are also temples. And this is a temple that's opening up in our same town. Temples are more for, like, we do ordinances in there, like marriages and baptisms and things like that. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting.
If you have any other questions, I've got 2 friends I can send you.
Yeah, we'll get into that later.
But not really.
I definitely do not have any spiritual awakenings to talk about, but yeah, it's been a good week. It's I think I mentioned last week that my wife is traveling. She traveled all last week for work, and then she traveled this week as well. So it's been kind of chaotic around here. To the point where I just had to call the dentist about a couple hours ago and cancel an appointment that I didn't realize I have tomorrow, and talk my way out of paying a penalty for canceling.
I can hear it in your voice, man. You sound exhausted.
It's been rough. The poor kids have just been getting like a protein and white rice for dinner for the last 2 nights.
They need a vegetable.
Because it's like, we had broccoli last night.
You microwave some broccoli. Good job, Dad.
I did put some green. I air fried it. Come on,
that's better.
No, but it's it's you kind of forget how you tag team things as a couple when you lose that. So I was a little bummed. I was supposed to go upstate hunting last weekend, but that didn't work out. So
you'll have
ended up sticking around the house.
Yeah, you'll have another chance to go. You'll have a bunch. Yeah,
I'm hoping. It's just this month, so we'll see. But yeah, other than that, man, things are going pretty good.
Man.
Been bouncing around, lots of work stuff and all kinds of crazy things going on. I think you had a topic that you wanted to talk about, right?
I did. I mean, everybody probably noticed when we were both talking about what's been going on, how busy we've been. Dan between work and trying to take care of 2 teenagers at home and everything else going on and other responsibilities. And right now I'm dealing with a lot on the work front. And that kind of led to the question of staying organized and staying on top of things. Yeah, this is a concept that we've talked about before, but in talking about this a little bit when we were messaging back and forth, Dan brought up the concept or the idea of talking about the Eisenhower Matrix and how we can apply that in our lives, especially when things are a little freaking nuts. So along those lines, Dan, do you want to kind of introduce what the Eisenhower Matrix is for those guys who don't know what it is?
For those of you guys who don't know, the Eisenhower Matrix is it's a decision-making matrix, if you will. I don't know the whole history of it. I've heard it from tons of different, productivity and type people. But the idea is that there's 4 quadrants to it. So if you picture 4 boxes, the lower left, and there's 4 boxes and an X and a Y axis. So the lower part of the Y axis, the vertical axis, is not important stuff, and the top is the important stuff, right? And then the X-axis is urgent stuff to the left and non-urgent stuff to the right. So if you're still following along here, the lower left stuff is not important but urgent stuff. The top left quadrant is important, urgent stuff. The lower right quadrant is not important, not urgent stuff. And the upper right quadrant is important, not urgent stuff. We'll throw a graphic up on the website so you guys can see what we're talking about here. But the idea is that when you get a list of tasks. And like Brad said, we're both really busy right now, and it's determining, how you're going to approach different things in life. So you got to determine, first of all, is this item urgent or not urgent? And then is it important or is it not important? Because you can have urgent stuff that's not important, right? Urgent meaning that somebody else may need it, but it's not really important. Whereas you can also have important stuff that's not urgent. That car payment that's due at the end of the month, that's an important thing, but it's not urgent because it's only the first of the month and you've got, 3 weeks to pay it, that kind of thing. So the way this works is each quadrant has a mindset to it. So the bottom left, the not important but urgent stuff, is stuff that you delegate, right? Find somebody to do it for you. You need to get it done, but it's not important that you do it. You can delegate that out. The top left, or let's go around the horn here. So the bottom left is delegate the not important, urgent stuff. The not important, not urgent stuff, that's the stuff that you just immediately wipe out. It does not need to get done. It goes away. It gets deleted. Forget about it. Regain some of your mental capital. Move on. And then if we go up counterclockwise to the top right quadrant, the important but not urgent stuff, that's the stuff like I was talking about. It's the stuff that you got to get done, but you don't need to get it done right now. So you figure out a time, schedule it, push it off, make sure it's captured somehow, but you don't have to do it right now. What you want to do in the situations Brad and I are in, right, is the urgent and important stuff. That's the stuff that absolutely positively must happen right now. That's the description of it. I'll let you kind of jump in.
Yeah, sort of riff on that. Taking a step back, I'm going to present you a scenario. I feel like this is my scenario at work daily. I get several Slack messages, several emails. I get pulled into email threads or conversations where people come over to my desk and they're saying, hey, Brad, this is really important. This is really urgent. This needs to get taken care of. They always preface it with the urgency and how much revenue is at risk, how many clients, implementations are at risk if this issue isn't resolved. Okay, so everybody sets the table with everything being incredibly urgent, incredibly important. And then they get to the meat and the potatoes of the situation. And pretty quickly you can tell whether the issue really is urgent or it's not. Now, I have to say, when I was newer in my role, anytime anybody said, hey, this is incredibly urgent, there is monthly recurring revenue on the line, and if this doesn't get resolved, the client might pull us an RFP, they might cancel. Every time I'd hear things like this, I was like, oh my goodness, we have to do everything within our power, because I treated everything as if it was a fire, and I was just a firefighter trying to fix everything. So it required a certain amount of discipline to be able to distinguish what is important and what is urgent, what is not urgent but is still important, and what's simply just not important and not urgent. And as Dan can attest, when you're in a work environment especially, everybody's going to sell you this idea that everything is urgent, it's important, has to be taken care of immediately, or else hellfire and brimstone is going to rain down and everybody's going to die. So, Dan, I know you've been managing a long time, so you've got a wealth of experience in this matter. How did you start to distinguish and interpret and understand, okay, I'm hearing all this hysteria, what's legit, what's not? I have some ideas, but I really kind of want to pick your brain on this first.
You brought up a good point, right? Because urgency, my opinion, urgency is in the mind of the owner.
Yeah.
Right? What sales deems as urgent is not necessarily what production deems as urgent.
Right.
And what engineering deems as urgent is not necessarily what operations deems as urgent. Important is probably an easier sell.
Yeah.
Right? The important stuff is going to be, and we're talking strictly work here because this is what's busy on both of our minds right now, but you can kind of extrapolate this out to personal use as well. Important is stuff that's going to move the business forward or grow the business, right? It is important that we meet budget for the month in terms of sales, right? So I run a production floor. So let me just use some of my examples. I run a production floor. Important for me is that I make budget for the month. Urgent for me is at the end of the month, things are getting inspected that have been built so that they can get out the door and ship. So those things start to migrate up into the upper left quadrant of the must-dos. Not urgent for me is, depending on the time of the month, where we are in the sales cycle and where we are in the build cycle. Not urgent to me is that RMA that came in from a customer that they're not breathing down our necks for. It's important that we take care of it so it stays in that top row, but it is not urgent at all in terms of making sure that we make budget, make profit, and then that kind of thing. So you have to be in the role that you're looking at for a little while to kind of play those games. But to me, it's always urgency is about, I kind of joke, will we die? Business wise, personal wise, that kind of thing. That's urgent.
Yep.
And when I say die, that's die in quotes. It's will the company fall down? Will the marriage fall down? Will the family fall down? Will the car stop working? Whatever you're talking about, that's urgent. Important is, does this meet our long-term strategy and our long-term vision? If it doesn't, then it's not necessarily as important. So those are two things that I kind of use, right? Like, will we die, quote unquote, and does it fit into our vision?
I take a very similar approach to how I do things. You have to learn how to be, you almost have to decouple yourself from the situation and try to take a 10,000 foot view. When you're buried in the weeds, it's really easy to get your head wrapped around the axle about anything. In my role, I deal with client success managers where they're getting yelled at or berated by clients. So naturally, if a client that pays our company $5,000 a month is really mad about something, they're going to take out all their frustration and anger on a CSM. I get where CSM is coming from. They're getting berated. They're getting yelled at. They're getting lambasted and put in uncomfortable situations. So naturally, there's an urgency there for them. When they come to me, one of my responsibilities is to look holistically at our entire company. Okay, I manage our bug process. And one of the things in which I did is I helped develop a bug scoring mechanism or matrix. And if anybody at my work is listening to this, we keep it under lock and key. I will not divulge anything in terms of how we prioritize things. But one of the key components is how many clients are impacted, how much they pay us, and how long until they're in renewal for their contract. Those are pretty big pretty big indicators in terms of how we look at it. So while it might be really critical for person A, for me, because I've been able to detach myself from the situation, I can say, okay, this is impacting this client that pays us $55,000 a month, and they're really mad about it. But here's this issue over here where clients paying us $750,000 a month, and their issue is going to be a hell of a lot more urgent and important for the overall well-being of our business. And yes, that does mean that unfortunately I have to deliver some uncomfortable messaging to somebody who in turn has to put themselves in line of fire and get beaten up over it. But in terms of determining urgency, it really does boil down to what Dan said. Are you going to die? Do we stand to risk a ton of revenue being lost? Do we stand to risk losing a customer? Do we stand to risk losing our wife or kids? If any of those things that are critical, these are mission critical items, are at risk in any way, it falls into the urgent bucket. If these are things that are pain points and uncomfortable but tolerable, oftentimes in the tech world, we like to talk about workarounds. If there's any sort of reasonable workaround, even if it's a little painful, that shifts it from an urgent perspective or an urgent quadrant to one that's not urgent. Doesn't mean it's not important, but if we can work around it, that buys us some time and reduces the urgency. Now, when it comes to important things, it's just like you said, when we're looking big picture at the vision of what we want to be. Is this something important for me in terms of my marriage, my fitness? Is this important for me in my role at my company? If so, we can determine that it's not something that can't be worked around. It can wait. It can be determined to be important but not urgent. And if it's something that we look at as trivial, it's kind of a nice to have. We can work around it. We can kind of work, deal with it, like a wife who doesn't put her toothbrush back in the right place. That's not an important thing. That's not urgent. But these are kind of the ways that you have to start to look at things. Is it mission critical? Is something at risk? Is there a way that we can work around it or compromise? Those are two things that I usually gauge when I try to measure how something fits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned a couple things in there that really hit home, and it goes back to the concept I brought up a little bit earlier about urgency is in the eye of the beholder. I'm thinking of a situation at work that happened recently where a young salesperson, right? So a salesperson who doesn't necessarily have bigger accounts, came into the production floor all flustered because one of our customers had a product with that had potentially a warranty claim to it. I don't want to get into too many details here, but we got to fix this right now. This customer's upset. I have to look at it from the bigger picture of the company, right? And I have to sit there and go, okay, I understand where you're coming from. And this customer is less than a $10,000 a year customer, which is small in our industry. And to fix this problem immediately, I would need to take staff away from what we're doing here, trying to make budget for our fiscal year coming up at the end of June. Does it make sense to take staff to fix a problem for a customer who really in the grand scheme of things is noise in our top line versus making sure that we make our financial commitments to our parent company? And the answer is no. Not what the salesperson wanted to hear, but it's potentially urgent to them. It's not urgent to me, and frankly, it's not important to me right now. So it was something that we decided not to do. I had support of senior management on this decision, obviously, once we laid it out, but it goes to the point of we have to take a look at that larger picture and take a look at how it affects not just the detail, the small issue, but how it affects the bigger picture. And yeah, like you said, with your CSM, right? My salesperson, they probably caught an earful. Sorry.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, them catching an earful was less important than us, making the right financial decisions for the company. So
no, you nailed it. Puts them in a precarious spot, but that's also what they're paid to do, to deliver that message.
Right. So we've been talking a lot about business in terms of the Eisenhower Matrix, but we've alluded to you can use this for your personal life too, right? And we talk about making decisions in life here a lot and how we can improve as men, right? So you think about activities in life that we do, all the things that we do. We go into the gym, go into work, playing video games, social media, porn, eating well, like all over the spectrum, right? You can immediately start to see how these things start to fit into these buckets. So video games and social media, not important, not urgent. They probably should be removed from your life or at least very much diminished. They provide no real value. Making sure that you connect with your wife, especially if you've gone through a tough patch recently, that's probably urgent and that's pretty damn important. So that's something you should be doing regularly.
Pro tip, always keep your wife in the important bucket.
Yeah, definitely a pro tip. She may not always be in the urgent bucket, but she's always in the important bucket.
Yeah.
What I'm getting at is you can start to use this for all the areas of your life to start to kind of coordinate. Okay, I've got all this stuff going on. I've got all this stuff at work. I've got all this stuff at home. I've got all this stuff that I personally want to do. Where do they fit into my buckets? How do I sort them? How do I categorize them? And then I've got limited time, so how do I start executing on them?
Yeah, the family piece, the personal piece is huge because you talk to any guy, and they're always talking about how busy they are or how little time that they have. And as most of us know, that's not entirely accurate. When you start looking at all the time that we spend on social media, coming back to what you talked about there, how much time is pissed away on social media or playing video games or watching TV or sitting doodling on your phone doing who the hell knows what? The time is scary. For any of you guys who are interested in traumatizing yourself, download the Screen Time app or put the widget from, if you have an iPhone, put the widget directly on your home screen. Just put it right there. If you have an Android, I think you could do something similar. And look at how many hours a day not only hours a day you spend on your phone, but how many pickups you have on your phone. It'll freak you out. And you think of all that time, if you look at your phone and say, man, I spent 4.5 hours on my phone today. Just imagine what you could have done with that 4.5 hours. Sure, some of that 4.5 hours may have been dedicated to work or talking to your wife or working on something productive or building a new skill. Absolutely. But how much of it wasn't? How much of it was doom scrolling Twitter or Facebook or Instagram? Imagine what you could do with that time if you took all of that and treated that as non-important, non-urgent, and then all of a sudden you've got time for some of the important, urgent, and non-urgent items that you really want to get done. Imagine how much time you could simply open up. And what that does require, and this is something I kind of want to dive into a little bit, is this idea of organization. So we always think of all these concepts and things and, okay, this should go there and that should go there. But really when it boils down to how am I going to make time to actually prioritize what's important? what's urgent versus what is not. Oftentimes we're over here bootstrapping it, trying to figure it out as we go. And that leads to a lot of multitasking, a lot of disorganization, and honestly, a lot of focus on the crap that doesn't matter. So this is another question. I'm kind of setting Dan up a little bit tonight, but Dan is Captain Organized. And I know at some point last year, we had some pro tips on how guys could get organized, I think professionally, but I want to kind of revisit that, Dan. What are some things that you've done to stay organized personally, professionally, to stay on top of tasks, to understand prioritization? Because I honestly feel like you're a master at this stuff.
Well, first of all, I appreciate that. And if I was a master at it, my kids would be having more than rice and pork loin for dinner. So,
okay,
obviously,
touche.
I need some work in this area.
I spoke too soon.
But I do believe I have some experience getting this done. So yeah, honestly, one of the biggest things that I would suggest is finding some way of capturing all of your to-dos. I don't care if it's pen and paper. I don't care if it's an app. I mean, I personally use Todoist. I think it's one of the easiest apps to use. I've always got my phone on me. I've literally got it set up so that I don't even have to sign into my phone. I can just click an icon on the home screen and add a to-do item. But capturing all that's going to do a couple of things. One, you're not going to spend any mental capital trying to remember all the things you have to do. If you have to remember everything you have to do, you are going to forget stuff. And it's probably going to end up being an important thing sooner or later.
And probably have to do with your wife, and you'll be in trouble.
Yeah.
I speak from
the other thing is, so writing down all your tasks, organizing them. I try to schedule things in my calendar as much as possible. Even if it's just phone calls, with me, it's like, if I schedule a phone call with you, it's in my calendar, and half the time I'm sending you an invite as well, just because, so that you know that we've got it. I find that scheduling things and using your calendar on a regular is a good tool to have. It at least lets you see what's going on. That's why I mentioned earlier tonight, I had to cancel a dentist appointment. Somehow or another, it didn't end up in my calendar, so I completely forgot about it. And then I got a text today that we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, is if you write it down and you capture it, you're going to remember it a lot better than if you don't. And then you got to review those lists. I'm looking at right now, as we speak, I just pulled up Todoist, and I've got, no joke, I don't know. It doesn't count it for me, but it's got to be 12.5 tasks to do tomorrow. Some of them are big, some of them are small. Some of them are as honestly as little as, update a spreadsheet with this information, pay a bill, reach out to this person. Some of them are bigger work things that I need to actually spend some time doing. But if I'm keeping my mental capital at bay or unused by writing all this stuff down, I'm bound to remember and bound to execute on it more. So those are two real things, that writing it down in a calendar and in a to-do list, and then reviewing it regularly would be my regulars. And then don't be afraid to delete tasks, right? If you go through and you realize that this is a not important, not urgent task, get rid of it. Or if it's something that's somewhat urgent or whatever, delegate it off to somebody else if you can.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I don't have a lot to add in terms of tools to be used. I admittedly borrowed my tools from you, and they work. I would put things on my calendar. If there's an appointment that I have to make, it goes in my calendar. If there's a call I have with somebody, it goes in my calendar. If I'm going to go to lunch with somebody, it goes in my calendar. That way I don't forget it. If there are tasks that I need to accomplish throughout the day that go into Todoist. I use Todoist after talking to you. There are a lot of other tools and task management systems that work. Some people do like pen and paper. You could even record it in just a simple note in your phone. A reminders app. Google Keep is really good. There's a bunch. So this isn't necessarily an advertisement for Todoist per se, but it is a really nice app because you can flag things and prioritize them, and you can just type out today and it'll automatically, dynamically know that it's a task that needs to be completed today. Or you could put June 17th and it'll come up in your list on June 17th.
Yeah.
And one thing that I did, so in the spirit of confession, I've always historically struggled with remembering the things my wife tells me. Not because I want to be a forgetful husband, but it's because I've just got a lot going on. And if I don't write it down, I forget. And she let me know about it. And she still lets me know about it sometimes because I don't remember everything. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I'm cured of my ailments and remember everything. But one thing I started doing is if she told me something, like a to-do list or things that she needed me to do, I would stop her, pull out my phone, and start writing a to-do list. It annoyed her at first, but she needed to understand it's like, look, you are important to me. I need to make sure I remember these things so that you know that I believe this. I need this so that I can remember and prioritize accordingly. So now there are times where if I don't have my phone out, she's like, hey, you going to take your phone out and write that down? Because she knows if I write it down, it's going to get done. She's going to listen.
And I'll say this too. You're laughing and joking, but it's so important.
Yeah.
I literally have stuff in my phone that pops up a couple weeks before my wife's birthday to remind me to go buy her a present.
Yeah.
A couple weeks or a certain amount of time before Valentine's Day to make sure I order flowers, get cards, all that stuff. As stupid as it sounds, and it sounds like you're not paying attention, but for me, and just like you described, that's how I make sure that it's important to me, by making sure that I capture that stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't have to rely on my mental faculties to be like, oh shit, this weekend's Mother's Day, I better go get cards and a present. No, I've got a thing that pops up and says, oh, hey, it's, whatever today is, the 9th of May, it's Mother's Day this weekend. Go to the store at lunch and get your wife cards from you and the kids because she's important. I've got, it used to, you used to get a kick out of it when we were on a battle team together, but I would remember everybody's birthday. I would remember that because I would either put it in my calendar or put it in Todoist, and it would remind me during that day.
Yeah.
And it just, to me, that's how I show that things are important to me. If it's important enough for me to put it in, especially as like a repeating thing in my to-do list, it means it's important to me and I don't want to forget it. So I understand where your wife's coming from, right?
Of course.
What, you big dumb monkey? You can't remember I asked you to get milk on the way home from work? No, honey, but it's important to me because you asked me to do it. So I'm going to write it down and make sure that I get it done.
Yeah, exactly. And now I know my wife is going to listen to this and remind me of all the things I've forgotten to write down.
And I hope she calls you a big dumb monkey.
I hope she does call me a big dumb monkey. But bigger picture, when we start to do things like that, if you really take a step back and think about it, I'm using the Mother's Day analogy. Is Mother's Day important? Yes. Is it urgent? This week, yes, because it's this Sunday and today's Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on another hand, if you're looking to buy your wife something for Mother's Day, but it's January 12th, it still is important. But the urgency is not there. It can wait.
Right.
So as you kind of start to really distill these tasks down and think about the things you need to do for yourself, whether personally, professionally, it begins to become a little bit easier to understand where in the Eisenhower Matrix all these tasks fall. And I'm going to tell you something very important that Dan and I haven't really talked about is, unless it has to do with your wife or yourself or your family on a personal level, anything that's not urgent and not important, even if it's important but not urgent, look to delegate it. The more you can get off your plate, the better it is for you to be able to execute on the things that are urgent and are important. And delegation is uncomfortable. A lot of guys are not okay with the idea of saying, hey, I've got this thing. It needs to get done. Can you do it? I need you to take this off my plate. But I'll tell you, one of the first things I learned in leadership, and I continue to learn in leadership, is I have to delegate if I'm really going to accomplish what I want to accomplish as a manager. If you don't delegate, you're going to get your head wrapped around the axle doing a whole bunch of mundane tasks that somebody else could easily do just as well as you could.
And not to get too far down the leadership rabbit hole, but that is a huge lesson to learn.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to fall into the, you know what, it'll be just quicker or easier if I do it instead of teaching so-and-so how to do it. And yeah, in that instance, you're right. But it's one of those teach a man to fish moments as well, because if you spend the time to teach one of your employees how to do a task, assuming you teach them correctly and they catch on, you never have to do that task again.
Yep.
Or very rarely will you have to do it. And honestly, it's something I fight with all the time, because the pain threshold of teaching somebody how to do something and teaching them all the little nuances, yeah, they're probably never going to be able to do it as good as, I shouldn't say that.
No, you shouldn't say
that. Up front, they're not going to be able to do it as good as you. And probably for the first couple of times they do it, they won't do it as good as you. But you have to make the decision of, is 80% of my quality good enough? It's that whole concept of don't let, what's the saying? Don't let perfection become the enemy of good enough.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Is them doing 80% of the quality of work that you're doing good enough to keep the ball moving forward, right? That 80% will become 90%, will eventually become 100%. And you know what? If they keep doing it, they're probably going to end up doing it better than you one day. But it's going to take that time off your plate, and now you've got more time to do the more important work. The same thing's true at home, right? Are your kids going to load the dishwasher as good as you? Nope. Hell, my wife thinks I don't load the dishwasher as good as her still. But if you let them do it, eventually they're going to figure out what works and what doesn't, and eventually they're going to become much better at it. And it's going to take that off your plate. My wife and I fight about this all the time. Well, I shouldn't say fight, but we disagree about this all the time, is that her argument is that she'd rather just do things in the kitchen because stuff will get cleaner the way that she does it. Whereas I'm like, well, the kids are never going to learn how to insert whatever task it is here if we don't let them do it and screw up. And it goes to the delegation point that you were making before. Free up your time, delegate stuff, especially delegate the stuff that's not important but urgent.
Yeah.
Can you delegate? This podcast is a perfect example. I should probably be delegating somebody to be editing these. I should probably be delegating somebody to create the videos for these things. We haven't gotten to that point yet, because sometimes, yes, delegation also involves cost. But is there value provided that I bring specialty because I do it in those areas? Not really, right? Those are areas that as soon as it becomes financially viable, we will be delegating.
Absolutely.
So,
and the nice thing is, once you delegate, you don't have to contribute all that mental energy into making sure it gets done. You just need to simply check in that it was done.
Yeah.
And that frees up so much time. That frees up a lot of, going back to mental energy, as I was just talking about. It's very freeing to say, okay, I've gotten this off my plate. I entrust the person who I've given this to do it right, do it well, and then enable them to do that. And it comes back to some of the leadership concepts we talked about in the past, and giving them those opportunities to grow themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point, right? Is it allows growth in the people under you. The interesting thing about the Eisenhower Matrix too is that, you can use it as a strict, staunch thing, right? You can make a list of all your tasks, and then you can have columns that say, urgent, important, not urgent, not important, and put check marks in the right ones, and then sort everything. And I did that initially in the beginning, but you quickly kind of get a feel for it mentally. It's more of a mental exercise when you're looking at a task list, and something that you just kind of, as you're perusing all the things you need to do, you kind of are mentally putting these labels to them. It's not something that, at least now, it's not something that I'm physically attaching a label to and then sorting everything and determining, okay, these are the things I must do now. These are the things I can delegate. These are the things that I'm going to schedule for later. And these are the things that just get deleted. I don't know. Are you kind of the same way at this point?
Yeah, almost exactly. I wish I had another angle to add, but it's pretty small.
No, I mean, it was something I wanted to point out there, because it's a powerful tool. And it's powerful in its simplicity is really what it comes down to.
Cool. I love it. I don't know, man. I feel like that's a pretty good spot to wrap. It's good to. Yeah, I mean,
this was a pretty good one. Definitely more, tactical than strategic, I think, which is good. This gives guys something they can kind of run with. And, if you guys got any questions on the Eisenhower Matrix, what we'll do is in the show notes, we'll provide a couple of links, as well as a graphic that shows you what I was talking about earlier in the episode with the 4 quadrants. And we'll provide a couple of links to articles that explain this a little bit. There's one that gives a little bit of the history too. I found out as we were talking that this was, not surprisingly, something that was the product of Dwight D. Eisenhower. It was that Eisenhower that helped develop this.
Shocking revelation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you know anything about him, that does not surprise you at all. But so, yeah. We'll get show notes up, and that brings us to the point, right, where we want you guys to be visiting the website. Check us out at untamingmasculinity.com. You can find obviously these show notes, and you can find show notes for all of our other episodes there, as well as links to our social media. We are definitely most active on Instagram, so give us a like over there. Hit us up. Tell us what's going on. If you found any value here, we would highly request a rating and review on your podcast player. Give us a like on YouTube as well if you're listening to us there. All of that stuff helps us get seen by other men and get our word spread. So make sure you come back next week. We got more great content. And until then, we'll leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?